You know how sometimes you fall down an internet rabbit hole, or maybe you just hear whispers about some big online argument, and you're left thinking, why is it sometimes so incredibly hard for people to just believe someone who says they've been wronged?
Hmm.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that kind of situation. We're looking closely at a discussion that sprung up around allegations involving Justin Baldoni.
Yeah, and we've got a really interesting perspective on this because our source material comes from an online forum, a place specifically set up by and for people making these allegations against him.
So right away we understand the specific viewpoint we're examining here. It's a focused lens.
Definitely. And what really got this particular conversation going, it seems, was the fallout after some legal activity involving text messages. These messages got validated in court.
Okay.
And the question that just kept coming up from this online community was, what was frustration, basically? Why is it so darn hard to believe the victim?
That's the core of it then.
That's the puzzle, yeah. So our mission today is to really unpack the arguments flying around in that discussion, try to get a handle on the frustrations being voiced, and pinpoint the key themes that keep cropping up around victim credibility, especially in these really heated online spaces.
Okay, so let's start right there at the spark. You mentioned the legal validation of text messages. What was the immediate reaction online from the perspective we're looking at?
Well, what's really striking is how quickly the narrative seemed to pivot, at least from the viewpoint of those skeptical of the person they call lively, instead of actually talking about the text messages, which were now, legally acknowledged.
Right.
The focus just snapped straight to questioning her motives, her character. Suddenly, it was all about accusations of, strategic PR moves.
Okay, so attack the person, not the evidence.
Pretty much. And the fact that her legal team used totally standard legal methods, subpoenas, formal requests for documents, that was painted as somehow manipulative or shady.
Right, that's such a classic move, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
If you can't argue the facts, just muddy the waters around the person presenting them. And this whole idea that Lively and her team somehow wield this, disproportionate power, that they're above the system, that just feels like something people throw out when they don't have specifics, right? It creates doubt without needing any actual proof.
Precisely. It's vague, it's meant to make you suspicious, and then you get the claim that everything was, quote, calculated from the beginning just because she intended to file a lawsuit eventually.
Which is a bit backward, isn't it? Maybe the lawsuit was the last resort, not the first move.
Well, yeah. It ignores anything that might have happened before, any attempts maybe to resolve things differently. It just jumps to this idea of, premeditated attack.
And the way smear campaigns were just dismissed as, oh, that's just common, that really seems to minimize the actual damage those things can do to someone's reputation, their life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you could really feel the frustration from the person who started this online thread. They just couldn't grasp the mental gymnastics needed to actively disbelieve someone who seemed to be following legal routes, maybe even trying to mitigate things before going to court.
Yeah.
And they asked that really pointed question. What would she gain by lying?
That cuts through a lot of the noise, doesn't it? It forces you to think about the potential downsides, the risks involved in coming forward.
Which are often huge, as the discussion goes on to point out. It's rarely a path to easy games.
So this actually brings up an interesting point that came up in the forum, this tension between what's legally allowed versus what some people perceive as ethical. Someone noted, the subpoena was legal, sure, but the framing was that it was unethical. Why is that distinction so key here?
It's crucial because it shows how public perception, moral judgments, can really diverge from the strict letter of the law. A subpoena is just a legal tool, right? A demand for information.
Standard procedure in many cases.
Exactly. The argument wasn't about whether it was legal, but about how some people saw its use in this context like it was overly aggressive or something. But the counterpoint is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Her lawyers were just doing their job.
Using the tools available to advocate for their client. That's literally what lawyers are supposed to do.
Right. Within the bounds of the law, yes. And the core issue for the people in this forum was, look, these text messages exist. They wanted the full truth out there. And they contrasted that with what they saw as the other side, the Baldonis, as they call them, preferring to, hide evidence and pivot to personal attacks, irrelevant personal smears.
So a desire for transparency versus alleged deflection tactics.
That's the dynamic they described. It feeds back into this idea that Lively's initial goal, or at least how this group saw it, was just getting some clarity, some transparency about what happened.
Okay. Now, another thing that seemed to keep coming up was this narrative This trope, really, that making allegations automatically grants the accuser things like power, fame, maybe even money.
Ah, yes. The power through victimhood idea.
It was mentioned that this exact line was used against people making allegations in a totally different situation, too. It sounds
Yeah.
like a kind of standard playbook.
It really does. And it's such a harmful narrative because it suggests people come forward for selfish gain, completely ignoring the reality.
Which, as the forum discussion pointed out, is usually the opposite, right? It often leads to intense online hate, harassment.
Absolutely. Relentless harassment, the level of scrutiny people face, the way their lives get picked apart online. It's hardly a fast track to fame and adoration.
No kidding.
The reality is almost always negative attention, public doubt, not some fantasy of instant stardom and cash. This idea that the accuser is just power hungry, it's purely a distraction technique trying to shift focus away from the actual claims.
And that leads right into another big point from the discussion, the glaring double standards in how things are scrutinized. People were pointing out how Lively's legal tactics, again, using a perfectly legal subpoena, were being dissected and labeled shady.
Right, intense focus on that.
But where was the same level of scrutiny, the same shady label being applied to the other side, especially regarding things like allegations of presenting potentially doctored text messages or claims about trying to plant negative stories?
That's the imbalance they highlighted. A real lack of comparable examination. You had these serious counter-allegations against the opposing side altered evidence, trying to plant stories that apparently never even showed up in legal filings.
Right.
But the online focus, at least in some circles, stayed locked onto the victim's legal strategy.
It really makes you question if the outrage about shady tactics is genuine, doesn't it? If it was really about ethics, wouldn't that concern be applied more evenly?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
It strongly suggests the conversation, for some people at least, wasn't actually about legal ethics at all. Maybe it was about defending a particular side, regardless of the actions involved.
That selective outrage is definitely something to watch for.
It certainly raises questions about fairness and bias in how these situations get discussed online.
Okay, so this then bleeds into the whole complex world of legal ethics and accountability for the lawyers themselves. There were concerns raised in the forum about potential professional misconduct, specifically against one lawyer, Friedman.
Yeah, the name came up. There was mention of an alleged attempt to get someone who didn't have their own lawyer to sign an affidavit, like a sworn statement, that apparently contained factual errors.
Wow, okay, that sounds potentially serious from an ethics standpoint.
It definitely could be. It touches on the high ethical standards lawyers are supposed to uphold. But, as the discussion also noted, it's actually pretty rare for lawyers to formally report other lawyers to the Bar Association.
Really? Why is that?
Well, the threshold is generally very high. You usually need really clear, serious evidence of misconduct. And there's often a sense that the legal profession kind of polices itself through internal mechanisms that aren't always obvious to the public.
Like an unspoken code, maybe?
Perhaps, or just a very high bar for formal action. And this was contrasted sharply with the very public calls you sometimes see to report other people, like this Ezra Hudson mentioned, to the bar, even if they aren't lawyers.
Interesting. So the public appetite for accountability might be directed differently than how the profession itself operates?
It seems that way. It highlights the public's desire for action, but maybe not always a full grasp of the specific rules and procedures for lawyer discipline. The focus tends to be on perceived moral wrongs rather than strict rule violations.
And sticking with the lawyers for a second, their actual competence and conduct also came under fire in the discussion. There was a pretty blunt critique of Friedman's style, especially when compared to the lawyer on the other side in a related case, Babcock, who was seen as more professional.
Yeah, the accusation was pretty direct. That Friedman seemed more interested in, quote, tantrums on podcasts than actual lawyering.
Ouch. That's quite a criticism.
It is. It reflects a perception of where the focus lies on public performance versus legal strategy. And you can kind of track the way online criticism evolved. The labels changed.
How so?
Well, going from things like tone deaf or she thinks this is Barbie, directed at Lively, to this more specific, it's legal but shady framing of her team's actions. It shows how the attacks adapt, trying to find ways to undermine.
And then there was that rather cynical observation that popped up that civil court isn't always purely about finding justice.
Right. That sometimes it's more about the strategy, the maneuvering, basically outplaying the other side. It's a bit of a sobering view, challenging that ideal of the courts as just finding the absolute truth.
It acknowledges the adversarial nature of it all, I suppose, the game aspect.
Exactly. Justice might be the goal, but the process can feel very different.
Let's shift gears a bit because you can't really talk about these dynamics without touching on gender and power.
Yeah.
Someone in the forum put it very plainly: discrediting women benefits men.
A powerful and, frankly, historically accurate statement in many contexts. It points directly at underlying societal power structures.
And then there was the follow-up point, which adds another layer of complexity. Sometimes it's other women who become the staunchest defenders of the men involved.
Even when, as the commenter noted, that loyalty probably wouldn't be returned if the situations were reversed.
Why does that happen, do you think?
It could be a mix of things. Internalized biases, maybe, a reluctance to challenge the status quo, perhaps a subconscious belief that aligning with power offers some kind of protection.
Right, someone else made that exact point, that people think being close to power protects them, but it often doesn't.
Exactly. A lot of people believe that a proximity to power will protect them, but it won't. That really nails the often false hope in those kinds of alliances. Power tends to protect itself, first and foremost.
Loyalty isn't always a two-way street in those situations.
Sadly, no.
All of this feels like it connects to a bigger picture, a sense of, I don't know, trust eroding in society generally. One commenter painted a pretty grim scene, a world driven more by fear, hate, and anger.
Yeah, and they made a really interesting link. They suggested that the difficulty in believing victims isn't just isolated bias. It's tied to a decline in broader things like empathy, trust in institutions like law enforcement, even faith in democracy itself.
So it's like a symptom of a larger societal issue.
That was the argument, that this struggle to believe is part of a wider breakdown. And they listed contributing factors: misogyny, confusion about masculinity, the whole cult of celebrity, and of course the wild west of unregulated social media. It all creates this incredibly tough environment.
Especially, it seems, for women who come forward. And that quote attributed to Melissa Nathan or Jen Abel, "It's easy to hate a woman." That just lands with a thud, doesn't it?
It really does. It speaks volumes about ingrained biases. And then there was the accusation that certain online figures, Nathan, Abel, Lion Brian, Jed Wallace were named, actively built this Baldoni mob, an echo chamber resistant to seeing any hypocrisy.
Creating polarized online factions.
Pretty much. And the discussion didn't shy away from serious claims about alleged smearing efforts against Lively and Reynolds, apparently sparked by something as small as an Instagram unfollow.
An unfollow? Really? That seems disproportionate.
It highlights the intensity, maybe even the irrationality that can take hold in these online conflicts. And the perceived lack of any remorse or calls to cool things down from Baldoni's side, according to this forum. It just reinforced the view that the goal wasn't truth, but silencing the accusers. It led back to that crucial point. No victim is perfect, but that doesn't mean victims don't exist.
That's a really important distinction, focusing on imperfections to dismiss the whole claim.
It's a common tactic. Deflection by finding flaws.
Okay, this takes us into some really disturbing territory discussed in the forum: the alleged behavior of certain online content creators. The example given of someone apparently doxing a private employee of the Reynoldses, sharing their actual home address online.
Yeah, that's crossing a major line. Doxing isn't just critique or commentary, it's a serious privacy violation with potentially dangerous real-world consequences.
For someone not even central to the main dispute.
Exactly. Dragging a private citizen into it, exposing their personal information, it's just, as the forum described it, disgusting and wrong, and potentially illegal.
And apparently this wasn't just a one-off. Others were mentioned: Zach, Dana, the clickbait TikTok crew, allegedly doing similar things, seemingly for engagement for profit, without redacting private info.
It suggests a worrying pattern in certain online spaces, a kind of ethical vacuum where clicks trump basic safety and privacy. The lack of consequences just seems to encourage it.
And the hypocrisy mentioned.
Yeah.
Someone like this Zach apparently discussing ethics while engaging in this stuff.
The irony wasn't lost on the forum members, clearly. And then the specific collaboration mentioned between NAG, describes as a licensed attorney, and Crystal Ball, someone flagged as having a questionable history, that raised serious eyebrows.
You'd expect more caution from a lawyer about who they associate with professionally.
Absolutely. It damages credibility and raises questions about judgment. Within the forum, there was this strong sense of a coordinated smear campaign against Lively and Reynolds, and these kinds of associations just fueled that perception.
People were even hoping for criminal charges related to a potential conspiracy to smear. That shows how seriously they viewed these actions.
It really does. It underscores the perceived gravity of the online attacks.
And we have to talk more about the role of these legal TikTokers, especially Nag, in the whole subpoena controversy.
Right. She was singled out. The accusation was that she kind of morphed from a legal commentator into more of a gossip monger, feeding conspiracy theories to Baldoni supporters about the subpoena.
Fueling the fire, basically.
That was the perception. It highlights how powerful social media can be in shaping narratives around legal issues, sometimes completely detached from the facts. The idea that there was coordination between this online mob and content creators like her was also alarming to the forum members.
It suggests something more organized than just random online chatter.
Potentially, yeah. And it led to some key questions. Who put Nag and Crystal Ball in touch? Why would a lawyer team up with someone seen as so problematic? Why are content creators allegedly doxing private citizens? How is any of this okay?
Those are fundamental questions about online conduct and accountability. And that anecdote about someone being mistaken for Ryan Reynolds online
Oh, right.
and getting unsatisfactory responses from the platform about doxing and someone creating a profile supposedly for investigation, that's just chilling.
It really is. It paints a picture of platforms struggling or maybe unwilling to effectively tackle harassment and privacy violations. It contributes to that feeling described as online interactions becoming pure thuggery.
Where the gloves are completely off.
Basic respect and safety seems secondary.
And with Nag specifically, the point was made that she had apparently gone full bad, even having discredited Crystal Ball in the past before deciding to collaborate.
Right, which just adds another layer of questions about consistency and credibility. And the irony noted was that her own online activity might have inadvertently revealed her own identity, putting herself at potential risk.
A cautionary tale about online engagement, perhaps?
You could say that. The digital footprint is real, and sometimes it leads right back to your door.
Okay, so finally, let's touch on the frustration that some people felt. People generally supportive of Blake Lively, who were still seeing other pro-Blake creators promoting figures like Nag, despite the concerns about misinformation.
Yeah, that created some internal tension, it seems. A feeling of, wait, why are we amplifying this person?
A kind of double standard. Calling out bad info from one side, but maybe giving a pass to someone perceived as being on your side, even if they're also spreading questionable stuff.
That was exactly the frustration. The argument that, oh, she's just an expert with an opinion, didn't sit well when that opinion was seen as, quote, outrageously irresponsible and pure gossip.
Especially when that gossip has real-world effects.
Precisely. When it fuels harassment directed at Lively's legal team, her employees, her supporters, it stops being just abstract online talk. It has tangible consequences.
And this brings us back, in a way, to the actions of the opposing legal side, Brian Friedman's team. While Lively's team faced scrutiny for how they got evidence, the point was made strongly in the forum that Friedman's own press tour, his public statements, were seen as just as ethically shaky, if not more so.
Right. Because of the allegations of defamation, of using DARVO tactics that deny, attack, reverse victim and offender strategy.
That's a specific manipulation tactic, isn't it?
It is a way to flip the script and make the accusers seem like the aggressor. The argument was that making potentially defamatory statements publicly outside the courtroom to sway opinion is ethically problematic for a lawyer.
And then there was that deleted comment you mentioned earlier, referencing some serious historical allegations, a past lawsuit settlement involving Friedman, an old claim about Baldoni's behavior toward the student.
Yeah, even though it was diluted, the fact it was raised at all shows it's part of the undercurrent, the suspicion about patterns of behavior. The question about why a related video hasn't surfaced online adds to the speculation.
Could Lively's team have it? Did they get it taken down? We don't know, but the question hangs there.
Exactly. It highlights the strategic complexities. And it feeds into the possibility mentioned in the forum that maybe other people could still come forward with allegations against Baldoni, Heath, or Sarowitz, potentially establishing a clearer pattern.
So wrapping this all up, bringing this fascinating, complex deep dive toward a close, what are the main takeaways, the core tensions this discussion brought to light?
Well, I think it really throws into sharp relief that fundamental struggle to believe victims, especially when it plays out so publicly online. We saw the incredible scrutiny they face, the constant questioning of motives.
Yeah, the accusations of ulterior motives, of calculation.
Exactly. And the whole discussion just highlights this really tangled mess of legal strategy, online storytelling, and clashing ideas about what's ethical, what's fair on all sides.
It's definitely not simple. There are so many layers, so many ways to interpret the same actions or words.
No easy answers here. And maybe that leads us to a final thought for everyone listening.
Okay.
Think about the bigger picture. How do these intense, fast-paced, often anonymous online discussions actually shape our collective understanding of victims and even how we perceive the pursuit of justice itself? Does the speed and the nature of the internet help clarify things in these sensitive cases, or does it mostly just obscure the truth even further?
That's a really potent question to leave us with, something to definitely mull over.